Thank you for joining us. We're joined by a former member of the Toronto Argonauts who played with the BC Lions and another CFL team that will remain nameless, I guess, for a while. Because hey, it's an Argo discussion. But he came here. He won a Grey Cup in 2004 and has been working really hard within some of the BIPOC communities. And for the purposes of this discussion, the Indigenous community. You know what it's like when you're in a locker room. Some of the guys, when they're younger players, think they're going to play forever and don't think about what's going to happen after football is over. Others, maybe, right from the time they're in college, they have kind of plotted out what their life is going to look like. For other players, it takes a little bit later in their career when they know they've slowed down half a step and start thinking, okay, these guys are younger and faster than I am now. Maybe I should start looking to what's going to happen in my post-career career. Your work and what you're doing now, was that something that you had planned for a long time, or did this just become sort of a happy accident?
Actually, no, Mike, not at all. I think when I got out of the game, I struggled like a lot of, athletes do with the identity thing, and especially when you do one thing for so long and that really becomes who you are, your identity, or at least you think that. And for me, it was the same thing. So, I was, really fortunate enough to be involved in a lot of community programs, our Huddle Up program for a number of years, and then other programs with other organizations that really got me interested, in ED&I, because I think, as a player, you get that opportunity to touch so many diverse communities. And, an athlete, in a sense, you're already a natural bridge builder of sorts, right? Because of sports, you can automatically, people kind of drop everything, you know what I mean, and welcome you in. So it was far from something that I just kind of like, I would love to say that I'm smart enough to, have the master plan, but it wasn't that at all. I had jumped into a program as a youth worker, and it kind of just went from there.
So you've been working closely with the Indigenous community. One of the programs getting kids to work, in football with people from McMaster, which is a great initiative. But how did you first get involved with the Indigenous community?
Yeah, you know what? For me, it was really it was a personal thing. You know what I mean? Because it was reconnecting with a lot of my ancestral heritage. My great grandmother, she was a Black Indigenous woman. She was descended from the Muskogee freedmen, which, if you know a little about history, there was a lot of, Black men and women that walked alongside Native Americans in the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma. And so, my grandmother, I had already, kind of knew a little bit about her, my great grandmother. But the more and more I kind of found out about her, the more and more kind of piqued my interest. And I think with, when you're looking to bridge out to different communities, it always starts with that sense of interest and curiosity. And that's really where it kind of started with me. And then I did a football camp at Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, which is the largest Indigenous territory in all of Canada, and instantly kind of felt at home with the people and really felt a sense of purpose. And that's really where it all started for me.
I think over the last generation or so, we've become more welcoming, whether it's in society, whether it's in sports. But being welcoming and being inclusive is a different kettle of fish altogether. How do we go from being welcoming to being inclusive in sports?
Yeah, I think, specifically, when you're talking about Indigenous communities, it's funny that, you look at somewhere like, Six Nations of the Grand River Territory, the largest Indigenous community in all of Canada, but it virtually goes unseen when you talk about, recruitment of their athletes. And if you look, you mentioned some Native American athletes, but if you look down the line of some of the greatest Canadian athletes, a lot of them come from right there in our Indigenous communities, right? So I think, part of my role at McMaster was kind of opening up people's eyes to the fact that, you have a hot spot right here, right in the middle of Canada, that's really an untapped resource. I mean, you have universities completely surrounding it, whether it's, Guelph, Laurier, Waterloo, McMaster, right, the whole gamut of them. And nobody really kind of, approaches that. So I think it's learning to think outside of the box. And specifically when you're talking about Indigenous athletes, it's looking at places, that you wouldn't normally think to look. And that goes for our urban indigenous communities as well, because we have such large urban indigenous communities and so many, great young people that are doing fantastic things and talented individuals that, organizations just don't look towards.
Well, thank you for coming back to the Argos in this format. Thank you for your contributions to the team when you were a player. Thank you for joining us today, but most importantly, thank you for doing what you're doing. We need more people like you, John. Thank you so much for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mike.